moments in life that quietly or suddenly change everything. A diagnosis, a loss, a decision you didn't expect to make. And once that moment happens, the real question becomes, then what? Welcome to Change Happened, Then What? A storytelling podcast about the moments that shape us and the lives we build after them. Each episode brings you a real story told with honesty and care, where everything was questioned and where even then they chose to keep moving forward. This isn't an interview show. It's a place for real stories shared thoughtfully, sometimes messy, sometimes hopeful, but always human. I'm your host, Heather Holt, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin, I want to invite you into something I'm doing called the Changed Me Community Drawing. Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out how you can enter into our monthly drawing for a super cozy Change Happened trucker hat or a super soft tee. Now, let's dive in. Brief listener note. We touch on mental and emotional health in today's episode. Please listen with care. Today's story begins in chaos, mental illness, rebellion, and in the quiet exhaustion of a woman who simply needed relief. Because sometimes change doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It doesn't show up with a dramatic declaration. No, for many of us, change is quieter than that. It's years of building, years of surviving, years of living inside an internal landscape that's slowly, almost invisibly, shifting until one day you realize you can't keep doing things the way you've been doing them. Not because someone told you to. No, not because the world demanded it. But because something else inside you finally whispers, enough. And when that whisper becomes steady, you begin to change the way you live, begin to change the way you see the world. This is Tenya Eichenberg's story, a devoted daughter, a mother, a wife, and a woman who made a conscious decision to step into her power to explore energy healing, rebuild herself from the inside out, and to create what is now known as the Metamorphosis Project. But before the healing, there was the unraveling.
I was like 4 years old. I had told my dad that he wasn't my real dad. We were at this five and dime store. I guess my mom was inside because it was just me and my dad, and I'm standing over the back seat of the car. I'm like, "You're not my real dad." And he's like, "Oh, really? Who's your real dad?" I said, "Well, my real dad has a mustache." But that's all I can remember. I don't remember any more of the conversation. When I was about 8 years old, we were living in England. My dad was in the Air Force. My mom had lots of ups and downs, and my dad, with 4 kids, was trying to figure out what's going on. And my parents would often fight, and we weren't always in the vicinity, but her behavior was very loud. And I think in some instances she had become somewhat violent when she wasn't heard properly, wasn't given the attention that she felt she deserved at that time. My dad, on the other hand, was a very quiet person, very subdued, hardly ever shared his feelings. My dad was not a violent person, so it wasn't like it was a physically abusive home. So it was like this polar opposite, going through this undiagnosed mental illness. My mom had not been diagnosed with bipolar disorder yet. So you can just imagine what that looks like to a 7 or 8 year old. My older siblings were teenagers when we lived in England. No wonder they were so rebellious. They were living in a foreign country at that pivotal age of 13, 14, 15 years old, and missing their American friends and going through puberty and all this other stuff still, and having to go through their mom's mental illness fiasco. So it was a very chaotic home growing up.
Tenya's life begins on shaky ground. She is living in a foreign country, something that at her young age didn't register as unusual, but for her older siblings, the transition carries some weight. There are adjustments, cultural differences, pressures she doesn't yet understand. What she does understand is tension. She remembers the grumblings between her parents, the undercurrent in the house, the feeling that something isn't steady. And then there's the memory. The first clear memory she has of her mother is not a gentle one. It's a fight. She doesn't remember how it started. She doesn't remember what was said. What she does remember is her mother falling into a sewing machine, pushed during an altercation with her father. Her father, she has already told us, was not a violent man, and yet something happened in that moment. Her parents never fully explained what she witnessed as an adult. She suspects her mother may have come at her father in a way that led him to push her off of him. But here's the truth. Violence in a relationship, no matter who initiates it, leaves an imprint. And to a little girl watching unfold without context, there's no framework to process it. There's only confusion and a nervous system quietly learning that love can feel unsafe.
My mom and dad separated after about 2.5 years in England. My mom brought me and my younger brother back to the States, and my dad and older siblings stayed in England so that he could finish up his tour. And then 6 months later, he came home and they got back together. When they got back together, my mom was diagnosed with a tumor disease called NF2.
Let me pause here for a moment. NF2 stands for neurofibromatosis type 2. It's a rare genetic condition that causes tumors to grow along the nerves, often around the brain and spinal cord. These tumors are typically non-cancerous, but because of where they form, they can have effects on hearing, balance, and other neurological functions. In her mother's case, the tumor was located on her ear. For a child, that means surgeries, doctors, uncertainty. It means learning early that even bodies aren't predictable. And when your home already feels unstable, a diagnosis like that can make the ground feel even less solid.
While she was going through that surgery, my dad we had to go back to Idaho for his next station. But because of her surgery and my older brother's behavior, they decided that he was either going to have to go into foster care or he was going to have to live with my aunt. So they left him in Michigan with my aunt at 13, 14 years old, and he never came back home.
We'll be right back after a message from our amazing sponsor. Today's Change Happens story is sponsored by Pure Energy Apothecary. Owner Don Lancaster and I are friends, and honestly, that matters. It's how I know how much care goes into what she makes. Dawn doesn't create products just to sell them. She makes them because she uses them and cares about how they support real people like you. Her magnesium butter has become a staple in my daily life when my muscles feel tired, when my legs won't settle at night, or when my nervous system feels like it's been running on overdrive, which, let's be honest, a lot of us can relate to. Magnesium supports muscle relaxation, helps with sleep, and eases that wired but tired feeling. This butter is creamy and absorbs right into the skin. No heaviness, no overpowering scent, just comfort. For me, it's not just relief. It's a small ritual that tells my body it's safe to slow down. If you're craving that kind of support, visit pureenergyvt.com and use code PURECHANGE to get your 20% off. And now, back to Tenya's story. Life doesn't settle, and in the middle of it all, her brother's behavior spirals beyond what her parents feel they can manage. So a decision is made. He stays behind and never comes back home. For adults, that decision may have felt necessary, logistical, protective, maybe even reasonable. But For a young girl watching, it feels like something else. It feels like a quiet warning. People who become too much don't always get to stay. And this is where something shifts inside Tenya. She begins to understand, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that stability feels conditional, that belonging might be fragile, that rocking the boat could cost you your place in it. So she adapts. At a very young age, survival strategies begin forming. Keep the peace. Don't cause problems. Say what needs to be said. Hide what needs to be hidden. Lying becomes less about manipulation and more about control. Deception becomes less about rebellion and more about safety. If she can just keep everything steady, if she can manage the emotional weather in the room, maybe she won't be left behind. And when coping patterns are born from fear, they don't look like fear. They look like compliance, or secrecy, or hyper-awareness. They look like a little girl trying to make sure she gets to stay.
So my mom had her surgery. My dad, my older sister and younger brother got into an accident on the way to Idaho. So that was, we didn't even get out of Michigan before we got into an accident. So we had to deal with all of that as well. But got to Idaho. My mom stayed in Michigan, had her surgery, and recovered. I think she was there for a month or two before she joined us in Idaho. And then life seemed pretty normal. I think she had been diagnosed with her bipolar disorder by then, so she was on medication. I do remember her going into an inpatient program at some point, but I don't know for how long. And I don't know what the reason was for her going in.
Eventually, after a few more bumps in the road, the family lands in Idaho, all of them except for her older brother. For the first time in a while, things begin to feel almost normal. The chaos quiets just enough, the air feels steadier, the nervous system softens just a little. Tenya shares that this season felt like a little bit of a leveling out. Maybe like finally the ground might hold, but stability in her life has never lasted long. Her older sister, the one who shared so much of the early instability, decides she can't handle it anymore. Before she even graduates, she moves out, and just like that, another absence, another shift, another reminder that people leave. To a preteen girl standing on the edge of adolescence, this doesn't feel like independence. It feels like abandonment again. And now she's entering the years where identity begins forming, the years where emotions intensify, where belonging matters more than anything, where rebellion and conformity both feel like options. But inside, Tenya's patterns have already been written. Hyper-awareness, people-pleasing, emotional contentment, fear of being too much, and coping strategies that once helped her survive are now woven into her personality. And as she steps into her teenage years, those patterns don't disappear. They begin to unravel.
At 12 years old, when someone leaves and doesn't say goodbye, it still leaves that lingering feeling of what did I do? So I don't know a lot of what transpired through all of that. Again, I think I just kind of, if I heard anything, I blocked it out. After that, I had started to write my sister. Not often because, again, I was 12 or 13 years old. That wasn't a focus of mine. I was starting to get into boys and I was in middle school. But I did write my sister a letter one time. And I think my mom was jealous or concerned or what her reasoning was. But she took the letter out of the mailbox, opened it up and read it. And I had told my sister some things that I had done with a boy, which at 12, 13 years old, I shouldn't have been doing. But my mom felt that she needed to call me home from school to discuss it, which was incredibly embarrassing and hurtful because she had invaded my privacy.
So she begins writing letters to her sister, letters filled with feelings she doesn't know where else to put, a private place to process everything she can't say out loud. But one day, her mother intercepts one of those letters. And instead of a quiet conversation, Tenya is called home from school, pulled out, exposed, made to feel like her inner world is now public. An invasion of privacy at that age is not small. It lands heavy on a teenager. When you're a teenager, your inner thoughts are sacred territory. They're messy, they're dramatic, they're evolving, they're not polished yet. And when that space is interrupted, especially without warning, it can feel like being put on display, like your emotions are a spectacle. And I want to pause for just a moment. As a parent myself, raising both a son and a daughter, through those teen years, I made a conscious decision never to read their journals or private notes, not because I didn't care, but because I cared deeply. Instead, I worked to create a space where they could come to me voluntarily, where conversations felt authentic, where trust felt mutual. That trust became the bridge, even today, that they know I'm here when they need an ear. And that's how I was raised too. My mom used to joke that I shared too much with her, but she listened. She responded with steadiness. There were very few secrets I kept, and the ones I did, they eventually came into the light on their own time. Tenya didn't have that experience, so her nervous system adapted the only way it knew how. If being open wasn't safe, then secrecy became protection. Rebellion didn't show up loudly at first. It showed up quietly, strategically. She would test boundaries, but in ways that she wouldn't get caught. Because if vulnerability leads to exposure, then control becomes the best option. And the rebellion that begins in secrecy often grows in isolation.
She felt there was something, like we didn't have conversations of like, are you okay? What's going on? There weren't a lot of fighting. There wasn't a lot of fighting between her and I then. It was just like I stopped writing things down. I stopped journaling. I stopped writing in my diary for fear of her reading it. And then at some point she went through my room and found condoms and asked me what they were for. She was asking me what I did with them, and I told her I blew them up as balloons, and she made me blow one up right in front of her. My mom liked to have that control over you and belittle you in ways that you didn't realize you were being belittled. I learned very early on to hide things better because I didn't want her to have that control over me. Just now realizing it, that because she forced me to have to hide things better so that she couldn't find them.
As Tenya shares more of her teenage years, there is a thread that runs underneath it all: control. Moments where she's made to be humiliated. Moments where her mother needs to assert authority in ways that feel sharp instead of steady. We're not inside her mother's nervous system. We don't know what she was carrying. Parenting through instability and a bipolar diagnosis can't be simple. But from Tenya's perspective, as a teenager, already navigating abandonment, secrecy, and the fear of being too much, it reinforces something. If you're visible, you're vulnerable. If you're vulnerable, you can be exposed. And if you're exposed, you can be shamed. And just as she's trying to find her footing, there's another move. From Idaho to Texas and eventually Maryland. By the time she lands there, she is deep in her teenage years. And all of that movement, instability, and emotional unpredictability, it's left its mark on Tenya. She has to learn how to slide under the radar. Not because it's manipulative, not because it's malicious, but because invisibility feels safer than exposure. And when you become very good at disappearing in plain sight, people may think you're fine. Meanwhile, inside, something quietly is building.
Around 15 years old, we moved from Idaho to Maryland via Texas during the summer. So my dad went to school in Texas for the summer, but we made it to Maryland where my dad got stationed when I was almost 16 years old. But at that point, again, I had already figured out how to hide things and manipulate situations to my advantage. You know, if I wanted to stay out all night, I'd ask my dad if I could stay the night at so-and-so's house, and he would say yes. Like, I wouldn't ask my mom some of those things because my mom would usually ask more questions and my dad wouldn't. It was very easy to say, hey, I'm going to stay at so-and-so's house and then stay out all night. Started dating men who were 5 to 8 years my senior. I was in high school, they were not. But it was all exciting because like they had houses and cars and boats, and it was just like, it was a whole different life. But my parents didn't, once they found out, they didn't stop me. I'm not sure why, especially considering how my mom was so intrusive with my life when I was, 13, 14 years old versus 16, 17 years old. I don't know what the difference in her mind was. After high school, I started working at Olin Mills, and that's where I met my husband. He actually hired me. He was my photographic supervisor, and we had been working together for 3 months before we started getting interested in each other and dating each other. And then we dated for 3 months before I got pregnant, and we had to reveal to work that we were dating, but we got married in October of 96. He was exactly what I needed at 19 years old. I needed to get out of the house. At that point, there was chaos going on between my parents. My parents have almost separated several times. Marrying my husband was the universe's way of saying, this is how we're going to help you change what's going on in your life. Because if I stayed at home, I would have continued to go down that destructive path to stay out of the house.
Before we continue, I want to share something close to my heart. Dear Sweet One Lullabies. It's a custom lullaby made just for your child. Using their name, birth date, and whether they were born under the sun or moon, each story becomes a gentle audio keepsake filled with warmth and wonder, perfect for bedtime or just because. You can find Dear Sweet One on Etsy or at changehappenedpodcast.com. Now back to Tenya's story. At 19, she does what many young adults do when home no longer feels steady. She leaves. She becomes pregnant with a man who is still her husband today, and something begins to shift. Because when you step outside the environment that shaped you, you sometimes begin to see it more clearly. For years, her mother's behavior has been normal to her. It's been the warm water she swam in. But distance in adulthood brings perspective. Sometimes it takes an outside lens to reorganize what's really been happening, to name the patterns, see the manipulation, and to understand the control. Tenya shares that at one point she and her mother go to therapy together, not to attack, not to accuse, but to try to heal the relationship. And that matters because it takes courage to sit in a room and attempt to repair something that feels broken. Therapy only works when everyone is willing to examine their own role and what someone cannot or will not accept responsibility for in their part of the dynamic. Healing doesn't always happen the way you had hoped. What therapy can do, though, is bring clarity. It can give language to what once felt confusing. It can help you see where the line between love and control was blurred.
Lots of manipulation on my mom's part throughout probably about 20 years where I really woke up and went, there's really something wrong here. I mean, I didn't really see a lot of it until I was in my early 30s. And I think that was because when my brother started having kids, my sister-in-law would stand up to my mom and would stand up and say, no, this isn't right. And it would cause problems between my brother and my mom, or my brother and my sister-in-law, or my brother and me. But it made me realize that my mom was very manipulative in trying to get what she wanted and using her emotions to try to sway things her way. There was one time I went to therapy with her and I had to tell her that she wasn't my best friend. But those were the kinds of conversations that like I had to have sometimes with other people in front of my mom, so my mom would like get it. But those were also the conversations that would cause her to completely shut down, use the silent treatment, and then 3 months later she would want to, sit down and have a conversation. Can we sit down and talk? Do you have time to talk? And it was just like our visits by that point were never just visits, even birthday parties. Before leaving, she always had to, throw an emotional conversation into the mix of something that we did that bothered her, whether it was us or the kids. As time went on, my mom didn't have so I'm the only one out of the 4 kids that never cut out contact with her. And I think that was my people-pleasing tendencies at the time, my caretaking tendencies of, like, if I'm not there to take care of her, who's going to be? I think my dad did his best to take a brunt of what was going on so that us kids didn't have to. And so it just got to the point where we weren't mean, but like we didn't just play into her things anymore. We fought back.
So Tenya's the only one of her siblings who never completely cuts off contact, even when it would have been easier, when it might have protected her more quickly. She stayed, and staying meant something else began happening. She started fighting back, not in secrecy, not under the radar, but directly. Tenya shares this story about Easter in 2019, a moment where everything finally boiled over. Tenya was trying to explain her mother's behavior and bring awareness to the dynamic, but instead of hearing her, her mother internalized it as a personal attack. She stood up. She left. An argument followed between her parents, and in that moment, something crystallized. You cannot control how someone else receives your truth, but you can control what you allow in your life. From that point forward, Tenya and her family had to set clear boundaries, not out of cruelty or rebellion, but out of necessity. If her mother was going to remain in their lives at all, those boundaries had to exist.
So I unfriended her from Facebook, and that started a whole year of just back and forth, trying to keep setting boundaries that she wanted to keep trying to cross. Had my husband unfriend her as well. When we unfriended her from Facebook, she said we unfriended her from life. I then sent her an email and told her that I wasn't going to respond to any emails, text messages, or phone calls where she was putting me down, belittling me, or I was feeling bullied or manipulated. And she cut me out. She cut off communication for about 3 months. I couldn't have those hard conversations with her because they never went anywhere. They always resulted in her being the victim and us not being considerate of her feelings.
Isn't that interesting how sometimes a symbol becomes bigger than the substance? How a digital boundary can feel to someone else like total rejection? But here's what stands out to me. Tenya was the only one of her siblings still trying. She hadn't cut ties. She hadn't walked away. She was attempting to stay, but differently and in a healthier way. And that attempt at health was internalized as abandonment. That's a painful dynamic. When setting boundaries is interpreted as betrayal, this tension continues for the rest of her mother's life. Her mother struggled to accept the boundaries Tenya put in place, but Tenya never fully gave up on the relationship. She stayed in contact. She kept trying, even when it was complicated or painful. And here's the important thing. When Tenya and I recorded this conversation, her mother had passed away just a few months earlier. So as she tells the story, the grief is fresh, the pain is fresh, and so is something else, relief. And that combination is complicated because you can mourn someone and still acknowledge that parts of the relationship were heavy. You can love someone and still need protection from them. Tenya is holding both, and that's not easy.
When my dad told me that she had passed, it was like a shocking cry. We were camping and I was sitting outside, and it was just like this cry of relief. But I still, because we didn't talk that often, it still doesn't feel like she's not here.
I asked Tenya if she had any regrets when it came to her mother, and without hesitation, she said no, because the place she stands in now is different. She understands that without those experiences, the instability, the manipulation, the boundaries, the grief, she would not be who she is today. And that's big. It's not denial, it's integration. She doesn't romanticize the pain, but she no longer resents it either. She sees how it shaped her, and today she channels all of that lived experience into her work as a master life and self-care coach, specializing in anxiety and depression. But more than that, she is someone who lived it. She knows what it feels like to carry emotional baggage that feels too heavy to put down. Her approach isn't about quick fixes or surface-level conversations. It's about alignment. It's about energy and intentional self-care, about helping women move beyond survival mode and into something steadier, something grounded. She hosts webinars, offers one-on-one coaching, and created the Metamorphosis Project, guiding women who are ready to stop just coping and start healing. And if you'd like to connect with her, I've linked all of her socials and her website, designyourexistence.com, in the show notes, and at changehappenedpodcast.com under Season 2 guests. As we wrap up our conversation, I asked her, "What makes you smile today?" And without missing a beat, this is what she had to say.
Oh my gosh, my grandbaby. Just thinking of her. She's 6 months old now.
At the time we recorded this, her granddaughter was 6 months old. And as of today, mine is too. There is something so sacred about that season of life, when innocence feels untouched, when their whole world is curiosity and trust, when your greatest hope is simply that they stay soft in a world that can sometimes be hard. I could feel it in her voice. That kind of love shifts you. So before we closed, I asked her to share her words of wisdom with you.
You're worth spending your time on.
So many of us forget that. We make sure everyone else is okay. We manage. We fix it. We just show up. But how often do we check in with ourselves? How often do we ask if we're okay? The better we feel, the more intentional we are about our own care, the more capacity we have for the people we love. So let this be your reminder. You are worth the extra long bath, the day away, a walk in the woods, that therapy appointment, or energy healing session you've been thinking about but haven't scheduled yet. You are worth tending to, too. And now for the What Changed Me community drawing information. Head to changehappenedpodcast.com. Click on the What Changed Me banner to tell us what stayed with you from today's episode or any interview episode you listen to as part of the What Changed Me community drawing. Each time you share, you'll be entered into a Change Happened drawing. You can enter more than once. Every entry is also automatically included into our quarterly drawing for a special Change Happened Super Prize, whether you've won before or not. Change doesn't end the story. It's often where the next chapter begins. If something in today's episode stayed with you, a moment, a sentence, a feeling, I'd love to hear about it. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. Because these stories don't end where the episode does. They keep moving forward in what we carry with us and in who we pass them on to. Change happened, then what? is written, edited, and produced by me, Heather Holt, with the loyal background support from my two sidekicks, Waylon and Dalton. Until next time, keep smiling and maybe let your dog inspire your next big idea.
There's always a reason to always choose joy. There's something deeper that the world can't destroy. Smile when you think you can't. Smile, get up and dance. Smile, there's a bigger plan. The storm only lasts for a while. So smile.